Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, host of the Power Up podcast, where we share relatable Jewish ideas that impact and upgrade our everyday lives. It's been very tense with the situation in Israel, and on this episode, together with the Wednesday night discussion group, we dig deep and look at what is our relationship with Israel and what is that based on. So actually, it's interesting what you started mentioning, because I think it's what we're going to talk about tonight is what's on a lot of people's minds, which is Israel. Mm. So I'm going to start with a very simple question. Mm-hmm. What's special about Israel? Anyone?
About the history.
But let's ask this, I think, really, really basic question of why Israel, right? You know, I think the famous story is that after the Holocaust, the Jews were offered Uganda, right? And they turned it down. But why, why Israel?
It's the Holy Land.
Yeah. But why?
It's our identity.
So what's the history behind Israel? What is the history? The history is that when God chose Abraham, right? Which maybe we should discuss that. Let's just do a quick brief history, and so that we can figure out what we're at. So when Adam sinned, right? God was looking for who was going to be the people that was going to fulfill God's mission in the world. And between Adam and Abraham, there wasn't really anyone that stepped up to the plate. Abraham came along, and Abraham recognized God, and Abraham formed a relationship with God. And then God chose Abraham to be Abraham and his children, his descendants, to be that nation that was fulfill God's mission in this world. And at that point, God promised Abraham, he said, I am going to give you this land. And what's actually interesting is that the language that we're told about it is that God said that he sort of compared it, he gave a parable, like imagine you have a king, right? And he has servants and maidservants, right? Instead of marrying them off to people of another, like maidservants of another master, that let's marry them together. Right, so it's kind of you the Jewish people are my people, said God, and Israel is my land. So it makes sense that I'll give my land to my people. What's the problem with that parable? Why doesn't it exactly work? Tough question for 8:45 at night. If it's 8:45.
Because different religions will believe that they're the chosen people, so they deserve the land.
Okay, so it's a good question, but also we believe that the whole world belongs to God, right? Not just Israel. Right. So what does it mean that God said, "I'll give my land to my people," right? Because if you're using the parable of the master who wants to marry his servants to his maidservants, that makes sense, right? Because it's not the other people, but the whole world belongs to God. Why? So why is it that specifically Israel was given to the Jewish people and not any, like, what's special? Like God could have chosen England, for example.
Is it because the temple's there?
But the temples were, you're right. The temples that were only given once it was chosen as the land, right? Maybe chosen England or I don't know, California.
God knew that they wanted it, that the Jewish people wanted it, that they were the only ones that basically were enriched from within and carried out the task, fulfilled their potential to take it on, that no one else did.
You're right. I'm still trying to find out what's special about Israel as Israel? Like what's anyone here has been to Israel?
Yeah, I think it's just such a special place, isn't it?
So,
The
try-
Wailing Wall, it's so sentimental. It's something, it's our heritage. I think it's part of us, isn't it?
I agree with you. Like I've been to Israel. Anyone that's been to Israel, you know, you're walking around and it's like you walk in England and it's great and it's whatever, but it's like it's our history.
Yeah.
It's our history. But is there anything else about Israel that is special besides for the fact that we have a history there? Yes.
I'll say the people's resilient.
Yes.
They are very resilient. Israelis are tough.
They
Really
are,
tough.
and they have to be. I was talking to a friend today actually, and you know I was asking her how's things going in Israel. And she's like, you know, it's we as Jackie says, we have to manage, right? Like she says, I put my kids. She's got like 2 little kids, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. I put them to sleep in a safe room, so I don't have to wake them up in the middle of the night. Like, yes, they have to be resilient. But is there anything else about Israel that, besides for the fact that our history is there? Because what I want to try and really get to is like, why did God choose Israel? Like, what is there about Israel that's different to, let's say, England and different to Egypt and different to...
Israel chose God.
One minute, Lindsay, what?
Whenever we went there with my mum and dad, whenever we got off the plane, you felt the warmthness, you felt okay, you felt at home. And it's the one place where my dad left his yarmulke on. My dad was quite religious because he comes from a religious family, but he left. Here he never left his yarmulke on, but in Israel, he never took it off.
It's almost like you feel more safe, don't you, that you're not going to have any.
Even though you're not more safe.
No, but
yeah,
I don't know
it's a different
you
type
feel more
of...
relaxed.
Right.
But he would, that's it. He didn't take it off, and that was it. He felt.
So it's actually the Midrash actually talks about it, and it's fascinating what it says. And it says that it compares Israel to Egypt, right? Because the Jews obviously came from Egypt and they went to Israel. And it says, what's the difference between Israel and Egypt? Egypt is a land that had the River Nile running through it, and it had natural irrigation, right? They didn't have to worry about rain, right? If you're thinking back in the times where people lived off the land, right? They were an agricultural nation. But when they came to Israel, it was completely different, right? Because Israel doesn't have any natural sources of irrigation. Israel is a land that is dependent on rain, right? If it rains, they have produce. If it doesn't rain, it doesn't have produce. Now, when I ask you that, tell you that, does that sound like a positive or a negative?
Negative.
A negative, right? It sounds like, which one would you choose? A land like Egypt, where you've got the...
It's like it's in control. So, like I've given you a land, but still like everything comes from me and I control everything.
Oh, so Esther's actually hit the nail on the head there, right? Because you're right. It sounds to us like it's a negative. It sounds like, you know, in Egypt, they can rest assured that they're going to have the irrigation, right? They've got it there. Whereas in Israel, they don't know. They you know, it depends on whether God will give them rain or not. But what's going on there? And it's like Esther said, it's because Israel is a land that is dependent on our relationship with God, right? What does that mean? It means that the Jewish people, we have a direct relationship with God. We're taught that when Abraham, right, developed his relationship with God, and he became the head of the chosen people, God said, I will deal directly with you. We call it hashgacha pratit, right? Where divine providence. Whereas the other nations of the world, they have God set up what's called a sar, and like an officer angel, that God gives the angel, the officer angel, whatever that nation needs, and that angel gives it to the people, right? So it's less direct. Whereas the Jewish people, it's direct, right? God deals with them directly, and it's the same thing with Israel versus every other country in the world. In every other country, it's indirect, whereas in Israel, it's direct, right? That God, we depend in Israel, we depend on rain. And even nowadays, right? You know, if there's a year where there's not enough rain, it's terrible, right? It's and what does that depend on? What does it depend on whether we get rain or not? Yes.
Growth.
And sorry?
Growth.
You're both correct.
Yeah.
It depends on our relationship with God. We're told that when we moved into Israel, that God is like our shadow, right? If you imagine a shadow, if you smile at your shadow, if you're ever at a lake or whatever, you smile. Well, you can't see the smile, but if you smile at the shadow, it smiles back, right? If you cry at the shadow, it smiles back. So what does it mean? It means that God is like our shadow.
There's like Israel chose God. Is that what you mean?
Hold on just a second, I'll get to it. But let me ask you a slightly different question now. I'll bring it back. In a relationship between two people, who is the stronger party in the relationship?
The woman.
Well, usually, but not always. Who is generally? That was a very quick answer. Before the question, it was like, yes. Who's usually, okay, I'll clarify the question a little bit more. Usually you have in most relationships, it's not in a lot of times in a relationship, it's not equal how much each one wants the other, right? So you oftentimes have someone who wants the relationship a little bit more than the other person.
Give and take.
Stronger in that relationship? Is it the person that wants the relationship more, or is it the person that wants the relationship less? Who's the stronger partner in the relationship? Less, absolutely, right? Because the person who wants the relationship more is sort of at the mercy,
The other.
person that wants the relationship less, wants the relationship more. Did I say it correct? The person that wants is at the mercy of the person that wants the relationship less. Now, in our relationship with God, who is really the stronger partner in our relationship?
God.
So
we should want it.
based on what we just said.
No, we are, because we want it more. He wants it less.
Nope. Yeah.
God.
Oh, okay.
No, if we follow along, right, if the person who wants the relationship more is at the mercy of the person who wants the relationship less, right? Imagine
We're at the mercy of Hashem.
no, the opposite.
It's been a long day.
It has been a lot. It's also it blows your mind a bit, because we always think that God drives the relationship. But we think about it this way. Let's say you have a friend or whatever. Let's say you have someone in your life who thinks they're a friend, but is not really a friend, and they keep calling, and you keep seeing their name on the caller display, and
Not them again.
it, right? Who's driving the relationship? It's you, because you get to decide when you pick up the phone, not the person that keeps calling.
It's ringing.
Okay, we're not going to get personal here.
Don't call me, I'll call you.
Yes, exactly. But so when we relate this back to God, as whatever, I don't know what your name is on Instagram, but Hashem wants the relationship more, right? God wants the relationship more. So it's almost like we are the one that is driving that relationship. That's why the parable works when it says God is our shadow. It's not that we are the shadow of God. It's not that God decides to give us rain and then we decide to do it, but it's the opposite, right? It's that we are the shadow, and then God is shadowing us, right? So if we want the relationship, if we reach out and want that relationship, then God shadows us, and God relates to us with it. So what does this mean? It means, as Esther told us earlier, that Israel is a land where we are dependent on our relationship with God, right? So when we, if you think about when the Jews, when they were in the desert, they lived in a time when God gave them the manna every single day, right? And that was regardless of how they behaved. and what their spiritual level was. It was given to them every single day. But then when they went into Israel, it signified a change, right? At that point, then we became responsible for taking the first step, right? We became the ones responsible for initiating the relationship, and it continues until today. That how much does God relate to us? How directly does God give us his divine providence? What's the answer to that?
As much as we want.
As much as we want, right? When we choose to relate to God and to develop our relationship to God, and that is by by Torah and mitzvahs, then God relates to us in a direct fashion. When we choose not to, then God shadows us, right? So that's what it means when God says that I want to give my land to my people, because the Jewish people and the Jewish land share something in common. The Jewish people and the Jewish land, what they share in common is that God relates directly with them. Right? When we talk about God relating through an angel, it doesn't mean that God doesn't know what's going on. It just means that there isn't that direct involvement, right? And that direct involvement is a sign of God's love, of our special relationship. That because we have that special relationship, God is constantly watching us and giving and shining his divine providence of us. And the truth is, even nowadays, right, where we have a different relationship to the land of Israel, because we don't have the temple, and we don't, we're in exile still, right? We don't have the complete relationship with Israel the way we did when we have the temple. And it's interesting is that we're told that when we had the temple, that God, gave his divine providence directly on the temple, and through that, the rain and the sustenance that the rain signified, it flowed over to the entire world. We're told that had the nations of the world realized how much they gained by having Israel in its correct place and the temple in its correct place, they would have done whatever they could in their power to keep the temple safe instead of destroying it. But what happens? But we don't have that. But even nowadays, when the land of Israel is when we're in exile, we don't see that the temple and the complete divine providence that we did in those days. In Israel, we still see it, and I think it goes back to what you were all saying. When you land off in Israel, or you get off the plane and you go to the temple, you feel it. You feel like I think someone said, you feel like you're home, kind of thing. Your soul kind of feels at home, because it is a land that is different, and the essence of what makes it different is when it goes back to it, it's a totally different place, because it's not a land that is dependent, that can live on its own, that can function, it gets its rain in the winter, and it gets the Nile, and then it's good to go. It's a land that's dependent on God, right? And what is that dependent on? That's dependent on our relationship with God, right? And that is what makes Israel so unique. It's because it's a land that we have to have a relationship with God sort of to live in, right? We can't just live in that land and forget about God, because and I think it goes back to what my friend was telling me. See, there are times where you can live in peace in Israel, but I don't think there's a single person in Israel today alive that doesn't remember a time where you feel the tension, where you feel like this is not a normal place, right? This is a place where where we are dependent on God, where we need that relationship with God, and that relationship with God is something that we drive, because God is our shadow, right? We're the ones that decide how much of that relationship with God we want, and then God shadows us. So that's a little bit about what makes Israel unique and different than England or Egypt or anywhere else in the world.
Thank you for taking your time to listen. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your feedback. You can get in touch with me via WhatsApp or on Instagram. You can find me at Gila Ross. And if you'd like to join an upcoming Wednesday night session, please get in touch. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Thank you and have a wonderful day.